koe o tira tēnā tātou katoa, huitahi nei, rungi te kaupapa tēnei kōrero, e harapi te kōrero hohonu, hoi no he kōrero, noi ho hei whakahiko te here ngaro koe a te tūmanako tēnei rā. Hoi no wai tēnei, he uri no ngā tihau no ngā puhi e mihi ana e mihi ana. Kia ora bai tātou katoa. Kia ora everyone, te Kawehau, Hoskins, Faculty of Education and Social Work. Thanks to my colleagues, a few of them, for coming today, and the rest of you. It's lovely to be here. I didn't know about this seminar series, so it's good that it's now on my radar in this way. So I might just stand because I think I get a bit more energy standing. I don't have anything, so just going to have to listen to me. I entitled this talk, Doing the Political Indigenous Māori Styles. And I suppose that is just my trying to, having tried to do some work over the last few years about thinking about Māori political practice and theory, so as something distinct from the very common, I'm arguing the very common sense ways that we Māori tend to be doing the political. So an attempt to just sort of look down a little bit into Māori ontological thought and frameworks and into observation of everyday Māori political practice, to think about the kinds of political, philosophical underpinnings that kind of go on every day in the Māori world but don't really get theorised about. And in fact, the kind of most of the theory work that's coming out of largely that broad corpus of kaupapa Māori tends to favour and focus on some fairly that's right, some ideas about the political that I think are sometimes at odds with Māori political thought and practice, under-theorised as it is. And there are good reasons for that. So today I'm really just wanting to talk about, in two parts, I guess a critique of what I see as a dominant way of talking about and theorising the political in Māori scholarship, and two, featuring a few ideas about what Māori political philosophy might be. What are some of the big ideas that might underpin Māori political philosophy? Okay. And I won't be too long. I've only got like 3.5 pages, and I won't read particularly. And so ideally we'll have a good opportunity for discussion. Do we have an hour? Yeah. Okay. So the development of Māori political philosophy and project. And I'm thinking about it as an explicit development within the broader field of kaupapa Māori and Indigenous studies and scholarship, which, as you know, is interested in scholarship, research and transformational praxis that centres on legitimising Māori ways of being, doing, knowing, thinking and so on. And my work in treaty governance and education and the politics of Indigenous settler relationships has meant that I'm always having to think about political ideas of theories of power, analysis of social relations and so on. And so the challenge that kaupapa Māori and Indigenous studies brings to us who are working in these spaces is to try and develop analysis based on our own foundations. We know foundations is a problematic term for a whole lot of reasons anyway. And that's been my challenge, and to try and encourage some deeper thinking for myself in that space as a scholar, someone who's got the luxury of doing this kind of work. And I've been sort of saying that I think this work is urgent, and here I do a bit of a critique of critical theory, and when I'm talking about critical theory, I'm not talking about any particular strand. I'm thinking in very broad terms about some of the kind of dominant assumptions that underpin ideas in kaupapa Māori that have been drawn from critical theory. So I'm saying that kaupapa Māori relies quite heavily on structuralist and critical theory understandings about power and social identities and relationships. And those understandings have become ubiquitous to the point of being kind of just unconscious assumption. I know this because I was raised on all of these ideas. And this ubiquity is because kaupapa Māori is in a large part a political strategy. So it's kind of theory, yes, and it's methodology, yes, but it's also present across all of our many social sites and spheres. You've got kaupapa Māori jurisprudence, and you've got kaupapa Māori social services, you've got kaupapa Māori housing, you've got kaupapa Māori everything. And so in that sense, kaupapa Māori is part of a political strategy, and one that we have promulgated with a high degree of consistency across those sites, social, political and academic. And this has meant, I've argued, that there's a reluctance sometimes to question the kind of politics, because we are talking here about a political movement being progressed in the university, being progressed across social sites. But I'm also saying, for those of us doing this work, that it really is our job to not be critical in the sense of kind of a negative moralising critique, but critical nonetheless, to enter into some deeper engagement with these kind of ideas that shape our approaches to the political if we're doing Māori work. So we've got this kind of political orthodoxy that I'm suggesting is quite good for us to question. And I recognise that people feel, as I do, that it's kind of risky to question that type of orthodoxy because it's been successful, hugely successful. It's underpinned, a whole lot of rights claims. It's underpinned the making of discursive and other forms of space institutions. I mean, the whole idea that we have kaupapa Māori theory and methodology that has any kind of, respect or legitimacy in the academy is an example of its very success, if you like. So, doing this work is, I guess, is risky in ways, but on the other hand, I'm, arguing for its urgency too. And I guess I'm arguing again for its urgency because if we are to we are to claim that Māori, that kaupapa Māori is about growing Māori forms of social practice and so on, then they better sort of, in a way, have been thought about in Māori terms. So what am I talking about here? I'm talking about, very broadly speaking, the kind of the kaupapa Māori privileging of a political position which, provides a kind of uniform critique of power relations, social identities and relationships framed largely in binary terms, and which I'm arguing, yes, is useful. Of course it's useful to say you're bad and we are not, those sorts of things, but also limiting. Why? Because structuralist analyses are generally too deterministic, often asserting a simplistic view. For instance, they, the coloniser, have all the power, we, the colonised, have none. Statements like, schools oppress Māori and benefit Pākehā, stand in for more nuanced and radical analyses that might consider both the benefits and the problems of schools for Māori. positive Māori agency in the education sector, for example, and so on. So, structuralist analysis have encouraged simple reductionist identities, Māori, settler, Pākehā, coloniser, that overlook the fact that people are not always reducible, or not ever reducible, or are always more than their social identities and labels. And such explanations, as I've said, cast us as victims, as colonised. They assume that all state policies are only and always antagonistic to Māori aspirations. Māori tend to disappear as agents with impact on social institutions, and our political gains seem to just sort of be reduced to very little. So that kind of approach has served us incredibly well and is likely to continue to serve us well. I'm not saying we should do away with that kind of approach, because that's clearly an approach that's made, as I've said, space for us political ground. But on the other hand, it's limiting, because if that's the only way we can conceptualise our identities and relationships and power, then I don't think it bodes particularly well for the whole challenge of kaupapa Māori to grow our own ways of, say, doing the political. So what in a sense started out groundbreaking, radical, it's maybe a bit more of a repetitive orthodoxy now. And I think it works to kind of miss opportunities for connection and possibilities for change. And it's kind of a weird thing, because those of us who teach a lot and have lots of masters and doctoral students, all are working with kaupapa Māori, theory and methodology, and all are largely drawing on these sorts of ideas to make sense of their projects and to design their projects. And there's kind of not much else for them to draw on, one, but two, it kind of shapes their projects in a way that again focus on, just heavy-handed critique, don't tend to focus on spaces, possibilities for openings, for leveraging spaces, change or whatever, productive kind of ideas. So it's all a bit dull as a supervisor too. So I'm basically saying this dominance of approach overlooks Māori agency and rich forms of Māori political practice that have potential to disrupt and initiate innovative thought and action. And I guess the other thing I'm saying is that it's not that this kind of rich forms of Māori political practice aren't at work. I see them at work every day. But we're just not theorising them enough. We just seem not to be noticing them. It's kind of disjuncture between what we do and then how we write about and talk about power and politics for the reasons I've outlined. So here we are theorising about struggle against oppression, our victimisation, dominating power structures, colonising Western knowledges, deficit thinking, but we're not really behaving in that way. Most often we are not acting like victims, but actually are incredibly courageous, relational and engaging. We step up and face others rather than disengage. We form relationships in the hope of mutual benefit. We're pragmatic and we privilege face-to-face engagement as the basis of good relationships. In other words, the Māori orientation seems to me to nearly always favour risky engagement over a kind of a binary oppositional politics, of which often includes opposition and disengagement. I could pause there and we could say something before I do part two. Anyone got anything to say or add or question? Kia ora.
Do you think theorising beyond quality, basically knowing then that it comes down to a lack of theory that you can use theorising or to write it into practice, and that makes it more difficult for us to express our place in this sort of politics. And then, of course, gets suppressed and never gets heard. Do you think that would be the way that's happening for us?
Yeah, I think that maybe there's a lack of confidence among some of us as Māori scholars to sort of step into some of those spaces.
Because I'll be honest with you, I went looking for a Māori scholar to supervise me, and I actually found it very difficult. I actually found it pretty cool.
You got Camden.
Yeah, it was about putting it down in writing and actually having that theory to back it up as well, which can often be very difficult when there's not a lot of writing out there for us to back up our ontology or our story, so to speak.
Agreed. I think that's exactly what's happening, is that kind of, doing one thing, seeing one thing, being part of a world in this way, but then theorising it in a kind of a completely other way. And of course, when you're a student, what I got to read stuff, where are my references, what am I going to scaffold this on? But then I think part of it too is just a confidence to kind of step into some of those spaces and then, see what comes from making those sorts of steps. Because I think, I have a belief that stuff does sort of come to you when you,
I agree with that.
yeah, when you step out a bit.
I just feel in a scientific world we have a tendency to ignore the kaupapa Māori aspect of things, mainly because it's not scientifically proven as such, and that's where it can get, I think, the mindset there of not really listening to the stories and not really acknowledging them as such, and in turn allowing us to be able to believe we should be in spaces like university, which should be the place where we can express ourselves and actually feel free about that. I've got an awesome lecturer called Avril who gave me the opportunity to write from a pure personal perspective and yet put it into writing. It's rare to find that. And again, of course, a Māori lecturer, a Pākehā lecturer. So I just find that there are spaces there that for us Māori to be open to sharing with our Pākehā lecturers, to let them share knowledge and actually help us to become the people we should be, rather than sort of being afraid of that, which I think is often the case. And I think it's that binary aspect that can actually make us not feel to share.
Absolutely, yeah. So an openness to that. I mean, but that openness is never without potential consequences of all kinds.
Aotearoa Māori, of course,
is
grabbed at every perspective too, because if it's something new.
Yes, or you might get disciplined by other Māori for working with non-Māori. That can happen as well. So there's all sorts of ways that's problematic. But if we don't step into those spaces and start to work them through, we're never going to kind of,
And then there's that question, is it kaupapa Māori? When in actual fact, if you're Māori, I believe it is. Thank you.
No, thank you.
I just wondered, it struck me the danger of the essentialisms which you outlined. It's almost the limiting for Māori scholars in the sense that you find yourself unable to sort of go beyond Māori scholarship to explain what is occurring, yet if you think about what is available to us in terms of scholarship, external in terms of Indigenous writers, in terms of post-colonial critiques, this material is there for us, but there's almost a reticence because we've defined it only in terms of kaupapa Māori. Do you think that we're now in a place of what Fannin would call cultural closure, that we are literally only looking to our own selves for the answers, and the answers might be beyond what we have? Just wondered, is there a way that we can use scholarship external to Māori, because almost kaupapa Māori has become defined only as Māori voice, and I think that's really dangerous.
Agree. Well, yeah, I mean, I think, I agree with you. I think my work in this space has been to resist that. because I'm kind of holding out for kaupapa Māori as something that can just be an opening space, rather than a kind of a space that is policed or, you know, in other ways closing. So yeah, I mean, it's really just how we engage with it. But I do think because of the politics of what we're in, it's kind of, you know, we feel there's a lot at stake to make, and of course critique has to be made responsibly, and I think critique has to be, should be made from an insider position, broadly speaking, because of course, we know the sort of what we're up against beyond ourselves, which is significant as well. So it's all just sort of difficult terrain, but I don't know, I just feel like for Māori, we just need to be a bit more confident.
Yeah.
Just need to just be a bit more confident, carefully confident, alert to the risks, but, moving in that space nonetheless. Otherwise we won't, we will just abandon kaupapa Māori because for those reasons, or it'll just become something, this, repetitive thing. All their research projects list it, they don't expand it, never kind of develop it, never say, oh, I'm making this contribution to the field methodologically or otherwise. Mm-hmm. Yeah, any other comments? Kia ora.
With the idea of being open to theories and positions that are coming from elsewhere, we have a model in the hui process by which people are welcomed into a group, and similarly you could think of external viewpoints as like manuhiri perspectives, and then they become like tangata whenua perspectives when they come inside the group of.
There you are doing Māori philosophical work. Well done.
Yeah.
Precisely. I mean, it's kind of, yeah, absolutely.
I mean, we're still, borrowing those things on our terms, right? If we're already inside the house as tangata whenua, we're borrowing from elsewhere on our terms, not on somebody else's terms.
Yeah, and I think again it's a confidence thing. Like, have some confidence that you can engage critically and thoughtfully with ideas from other places and other traditions. I mean, I know for me that, reading work in, dare I say it, anthropology or, new materialism or whatever, has really assisted me to think back into, my own sort of theoretical work, and open spaces there that I hadn't thought of. I mean, of course, there's always risks, but I think fundamental to a Māori approach is the risk taking. Yeah. So that might be the basis of what we try and say is the basis of Māori philosophy is risk taking.
Well, I was really interested, in the idea of the kanohi ki te kanohi as kind of a risky engagement. But it is an engagement that takes place on according to a set of rules, right? So it's not a sort of an unconditional welcome. You do have to act in a way that is tika, right?
Yeah.
And so it's not sort of anybody is welcome.
No.
You are welcome on our terms. That's kind of So it's a risk, but it's not unconditional risk.
No, it's not, but you don't always know the outcome.
No.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that's the point, just because you say face to face doesn't mean some kind of, it's all going to be sweet and there's some cosy togetherness ahead. It could also mean you get knocked over the head with a...
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, but the point is the engagement.
Yeah.
Okay, anything else? Otherwise, I've got a few points to make about...
Can I just say,
yeah.
the original Māori work that people like Graham and others did, that work did engage too with the ideas of people like Gramsci and Freire and so on, didn't it? I mean, I think that when you talk about the structuralism that it carries inside of it, it carries the legacy of some of that thought.
Absolutely.
So it already was engaging.
Exactly.
Ideas
exactly.
Outside, as it were.
But I think it's sort of people are not even going back to that theoretical work and those traditions and engaging with, explicitly noting that Graham did all this work that was Gramscian and Frankfurt School, and so did Leone and so on, and therefore engaging those ideas. It's just sort of it's kind of lifted, permeated to some kind of, assumed position we have about the political. I mean, it's my kind of engagement with it, my reading of it. Yes, so even to go back and revisit kaupapa Māori connections to that. I mean, people have distanced themselves from that work, they've sort of thought, oh, kaupapa Māori shouldn't really have critical theory foundations. And so they've distanced themselves in some ways from that work, but I'm sort of arguing that they're still there anyway, because they're kind of assumed political positions that work along these lines. Okay. What time is it? Anyone?
It's 1:30. So.
Okay, cool. So, yes, I just want to talk. I'm just trying to write a chapter on this at the moment, so don't expect me to have all the answers, but I'm just trying to. It's probably actually a ridiculous task, but I'm just trying to think about Māori political philosophy. What might be some kind of key ideas that help us to be critical of, sort of structuralist only approaches, and open us to doing more work and more development in that space, like this idea of the hui as a, what did you call it? Well,
As a
way of engaging,
yeah,
newness and difference and other ideas. Ka pai, I like it. So, I started off by thinking about this whole idea that is it just sort of colonising to think about Māori philosophy in a kind of abstract, intellectual, ivory tower kind of way? I mean, how did we produce philosophical understandings before? And how are we continuing to produce them now, but they're going unnoticed? So, of course we're going to produce them in places like this because here we are. But on the other hand, maybe we need to recognise that the production of Māori philosophical understandings is not containable to the academy, and a lot of it is produced elsewhere in place and context by, organic intellectuals or practitioners or tohunga or experts or your auntie or cousin, kaitiaki, also produced by places themselves and forces that we might not understand, and non-human others. That if we think about the Māori world as fundamentally relational, and we think about all beings in the Māori world as agentic, then non-human others surely are producing thought and understandings as well, maybe independent of us, maybe with us. So just sort of trying to think how we could crack open the whole idea of philosophy, production of philosophy, and the ways in which it might be produced, the how of that, not only looking at reading books, but I was thinking about some of the traditional ways in which people did produce understandings. That there was obviously the wānanga, the whare wānanga, but there was also practices of through karakia, through nohopoku, forms of meditation and silence, through tests of endurance, like going out and doing hard out stuff for days on end. So the practice, the how of the production of Māori philosophy is a question to be considered. So back to this relational idea. That seems foundational to a Māori ontology, and therefore likely foundational in a non-foundational way, I would argue, to Māori political philosophy. So if this world is a dynamic network of non-human and human agency relationships, that does mean we can't think about Māori philosophy as being only about human relations and not only produced by us, by people. Any Māori political philosophy will need to be open, consult with and intentionally relate with non-human political agencies in both the co-production of political thought and in political practice. So the development of philosophical understandings about political relationships would then necessarily pay attention to particular relations in context and in place. So I think for Māori it's not like, oh, all the trees are my relations. Well, maybe it is, but particular trees, particular waterways, particular stones, particular people, particular ideas. These are this draws us to an idea of what philosophical understandings emerge in the particularity of certain relationships, not just sort of a broad, abstracted idea about relations. So understandings would be particular, local, and those relations in turn would lead to political insights and practices responsive to context, not kind of generalised. So the particular, I'm saying, would be privileged ahead of the general and the abstract in the production of Māori philosophical thought. Something related to that. So getting back to what Sean was saying, a relational ontology privileges the personal, and the face-to-face is the basis of the possibility of positive, enduring political relationships. That's an idea from Eri Jury, Setai Hakure Jury, which I just think is never talked about enough. This kind of distinction between the personal and the political, the ethical and the political, is just not a distinction. In a sense, everything is political and everything is also personal. But you really are not going to get large-scale positive political relationships if you don't have good personal face-to-face relationships. That's kind of key. So the political is more embodied, it's more situated and contextual, less universal, abstract, bureaucratic and documentary, which is a word I got from Avril in our paper. It's like a basic word, but I thought, oh, it's goody. So it's more focused on establishing productive cycles of obligation and interdependence than asserting kind of an abstracted idea of sovereignty. So there's a kind of iterativeness and open-endedness to a possibility of political relations, far less, okay, we won our court case, or now our settlement is over, or we've made this agreement with the Crown, the end, or with the hapu next door, but more a kind of an open, just the kind of behaving in ways that keep you, hopefully, in productive cycles of interdependence. So if the Māori world is relational, then developing contemporary political theory should likely privilege relationality. That seems quite basic, which, as I said before, doesn't mean that there's never conflict or disengagement or opposition. Relationality is not a route to warm, fuzzy, cosy relations. And I think that's a thing worth saying, because I think a lot of non-Māori feel that, they get that idea of relationality in their mind, they that's all nice and going to be together and it's all going to be great. But actually, it's a fraught space, isn't it? And so all of those possibilities are present. But I guess the point is that there's a preference for engagement, for staying in relationships, even where the power differentials are huge. I was listening to, I don't know if anyone watched Te Ao last night, and who was the Māori fella there?
He was great, wasn't he?
Wasn't he great? Yeah, so he just was like, you're everything I'm talking about right there. But he was basically saying, his iwi, they see the Crown as their partner and the way that they understand the treaty. So, of course, there's a huge power differential, but they treat the Crown as their partner, they treat the Crown respectfully, they treat the Crown in the way that, with the vision and the hope of the treaty present in the way that they behave. So even when, relationships are like crazily out of whack, there's still this thing for engagement. So sometimes you might lose, but I think history and our everyday practice tells us that we're going to choose that every time. Okay. So relatedly, a relational world is alert to relationality and connection, but understands that as different from unity and sameness. A relational world stresses respect for difference of others, acknowledging them on their own terms. Another great idea from Eddie Jury. Simple idea, but not the kind of who was the philosopher? Just trying to think of that we were just dealt with. Yeah, maybe. Anyway, not this idea of recognising the other as another self. Yeah. Hegel. Not recognising the other as another self, as an alter ego and so on, another you, but, kind of trying to attempt to understand the other on their own terms, which is a struggle for all of us, of course. So respect for the mana, the unique identity, force and agency of others. Privileging difference would be critical of forms of political recognition, of course, like those offered by the nation state, that recognise and include Māori Indigenous people on the basis of our sameness. The basis of productive political relations is, of course, respect for ontological difference. Easier said than done, and of course, if we get rights recognition through various forms of rights within the nation state, well, we're taking them, aren't we? I mean, we do that every day. We're highly pragmatic, reformist, as well as activist and radical as well. So all of those things are at work. But, important to just kind of keep, I guess, philosophically speaking, theoretically speaking, reminding ourselves of these things. So one more point. A relational world is a moral, or if you prefer, an ethical world. Now, I guess I say that because I think relationality as an ontological orientation, if you like, makes it ethical. Because it draws us into relationship, and we can't, we might in a way end up at war with somebody, but in the first instance we've had to attempt to kind of recognise that other on their own terms. So all of those practices that we know, aroha, manaaki, āwhina, whanaunga, tanga, utu, are basic to Māori ways of doing the political. They're not kind of set apart as social or personal practices, but all have political effects. All are about the possibility of larger scale political relationships. So I think Māori political philosophy would explore maybe privilege, a politics of ethical responsibility for others, ahead of the kind of rights discourse. Or I could say that the rights stuff is actually quite well developed, but the kind of idea of responsibility, even from a position of relative powerlessness, is something that I think we could offer a lot too. And that ethicality is not just sort of now, but I'm thinking of, the idea that we are the living face of our ancestors, that kind of idea. So in that way we inherit obligations and commitments and promises to other people, to other beings, to other worlds, that in a Māori way of thinking extend through time and space, are always present and never discharged. Whoa, heavy. And Avril and I were talking about this in a paper we wrote about the way the treaty, for example, starting with the sovereign, but then through the treaty text itself and the people that were connected to it, Hobson, those rangatira who put their names on that paper, and how, current Crown members, politicians and so on, they are in a whakapapa of relations with that agreement, and like in many more ways than just, a bit of history's gone past, in the Māori mind anyway. And so I guess it's sort of an example of the way we're bound into these relationships, whether we like it or not. And we can't ever just ultimately, flick them off forever and ever. So that's all I've got. Thank you.
Please, we have some time for questions, so I'll pass it over to you guys. I was talking to someone at Tuananga Raukawa who, growing up, had sort of four, had spent every weekend at one of his four grandparents' marae, and kind of fully sort of living, breathing kaupapa Māori. The problem for him had come when his children, his grandchildren, had come to him and sort of said, what's kaupapa or what's tikanga, and they have to try and explain something in a more abstract terms that was like breathing for you, that you never really kind of noticed. But so his response was always to take them out onto the rohe and you catch eels or something, collect food. But this relationship with the whenua as a sort of pedagogy or that being the type of philosophizing, I suppose. But after Tanya Newton spoke, Tracy McIntosh was saying, that the only way you learn how to speak like that sort of oratory, is spending time on the whenua.
Nice, yeah.
I've got another one if no one's got anything. Sorry. That was just fantastic, thank you. And you talked a little bit about it being risky business to step outside of the sort of mandated traditional kai support kaupapa Māori, this is what I do, and then it stops. How might we support Māori scholars or people doing this risky business as Māori? How might we work together to enable the new in some of our practices?
Well, read their work, cite it. I don't know, it might help. Well, I'm just saying that because I've been in this sort of situation a little bit, and I'm quite sort of tough, but I can see if you're not that tough, then that's a bit of a hard road to hoe. But if your work is just silence, people won't go near it because, whatever someone else said, oh no, that's whatever, then, we're just buying into that. So I don't mean it like, let's back each other's careers. I just mean it like, engage with the work and cite it and keep going and talk to people and have like minds. I mean, a very small group of people that I know have just started this group called the Māori Philosophy Group, and we're kind of very dysfunctional. But we kind of feel like we found our little, our bit of a little home, and we just, and some we're very different, but in basic ways we kind of, are trying to be a little bit more adventurous. So I just think to find your friends, if you like, read and support each other's work. I don't know, you might have some ideas.
Oh.
Yeah.
Genuinely
Yeah.
passionate about.
I don't know. That's helped me. Mm.
I'm just at the moment reading a little bit about, her name is Rosalind Dipro's Corporeal Body, and I started really one of the main chapters that I want to read with Ravenous, which is a person who Paul actually introduced me to. So for me, it's the misunderstanding of Manaki Kana that I think is quite huge in terms of even signing the treaty. I think Māori have come from it from a very spiritual aspect. In terms of Manaki, Manaki to me means unconditional love, if you want to put it in terms of understanding from a non-Māori perspective, in that even if we fail through the settlement processes or whatever it is, we still will love. And it's not to be seen as we get trampled on, it is to be seen as we are a people that have always had that sense of Manaki in it. So I think from a pure, what you were saying before, the braveness, you have to believe in you first before you can be brave. And I think for me it's about understanding the concepts behind what drove the things that happened to put us in these positions that we're in today. My topic is in alignment with a Waitangi Tribunal claim that I have, and it's to do with money is racist. So I'm actually looking at all the very different ways that, and that's a very, how can I put it, I'm coming from a pure, unknowledgeable idea, I think, of the area of money, but I'm finding more and more as I work with certain people, of course, Campbell, that knowledge is growing, the understanding of it, and not to be afraid to understand. Actually, my tupuna, when they invited or allowed for Uruatara to bring Samuel Marsden into the harbour, Whangaroa, he looked at the white man as the other. It wasn't the other way around. So for me, it was purely understanding that and knowing that the white man came purely to see that ground that we were standing on and the possible surplus value that would come out of that. It wasn't really about Manaki, it wasn't really about love, but we had always seen it as that way. So I really appreciate that you helped me see it in a better context from the perspective of the political side, because we can't hide from that. Everything turns into the political. So I appreciate your speech. Thank you.
It's difficult, isn't it? Because I feel like in my growing up, that whole idea of aroha, which I think is a really kind of one of the key teachings of the Māori world, and maybe it's been inflected with Christianity too, so we can admit that. But I still think it's a kind of really powerful idea. But politically speaking, we've been kind of, my generation, we told, oh, that's just naive, don't fall for that love thing, because you're just getting, everything is, you're just getting ripped off. But then if we set aside love, then what? So it's just all the difficulty of that.
I think that's what's carrying us through. That's what's giving us that sense of keep going no matter what. Because you do believe in the Kawehau tupuna signed that treaty. There was a reason behind it, and that is to come together, to share knowledge.
Yeah, well, all of those, all of the ways those ancestors of ours, when they were trying to, work with these governors and kind of, the kind of growing colonial presence here, was to try and get a relationship with those people, like really a relationship. And it was always, my loving friend, so it's trying to pull grey and awful creatures like that into a Māori way of relating politically, and love is at the foundation of that. Eddie Jury's work is really good on this, very simple but very lovely.
Might need to kind of finish on that note, or is there one really quick comment?
Just in reference to your point about how we're bound into relationships, and we're working with particular groups and participants, is that meant to say that we're always bound to them in terms of our relationship? Bound to them forever? Because that's quite a scary thought to me.
Well, being bound to someone doesn't mean that you're always engaged with them or always in their face, but they're in the world and you are. So one way or another, you're kind of bound, I guess is all I'm saying. So, a Levinasian idea would be that you can, this big ethical demand that you're always responsible to the other, that's a responsibility you can never discharge. It's ginormous, overpowering, all those things. But, and he would say that's the foundation of the relationship. Any relationship is that ethical responsibility for the other. That doesn't mean we don't turn away from it. It doesn't mean we don't kill people, we don't ignore them, but that doesn't mean that ethical demand is still not circulating, is still not present. We just can't fulfill it, and sometimes we try and destroy it.
We kind of out of time. There's a meeting in here after, so we will have to move on and continue discussion.
Thank you, everyone.
That was really good.
Oh, thank you.
And I was wondering